Thank you very much. I appreciate the kind introduction. And I'm very happy to be here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae. I actually share something in common with Humanae Vitae. July 25th is my birthday. So I'm 49, not 50, but getting there. So today what I want to talk about is the good of procreation. Imagine a society in which people did not understand that private property was a good thing. If you were trying to explain to them why stealing was wrong, they would have a real hard time figuring that out. And imagine a society in which truthfulness and honesty wasn't something that people thought was important. Well, if you lived in a society like that, it would be very hard for them to understand why the church teaches that lying is wrong. And so what I want to focus on today is the good of procreation, because I think unless we understand the good of procreation, it's going to be very hard to understand why contraception is wrong. I had a very great honor to meet our Pope, to meet the Holy Father, Pope Francis. And, before you meet the Pope, if you got an invitation, be very excited, and you think, well, what am I going to say to the Pope when I meet the Pope? And I thought about different things I could say, and, I just wasn't sure. And after a while, I thought, okay, well, I'll say, Holy Father, would you please pray for my family and my university? And I thought, well, maybe he'll say, tell me about your family or what university, and we'll have a little conversation. And then I thought, okay, well, what language should I use to speak with the Holy Father? Because he knows Spanish and Italian, but unfortunately, I don't know those languages. And I've heard that he doesn't know English very well, so I said, well, I better not do that. But he lived in Germany for 2 years, and I also lived in Germany for 2 years. And so I thought, okay, I'll speak to him in German. So I go, okay, great, got my plan, and I'm waiting in line, and the person in front of me is shaking the Holy Father's hand, talking to him, and then he steps out of the way, and then I walk up, and there he is, the Holy Father. So I stick out my hand and say in English, nice to meet you. So it doesn't always go the way you were planning, but today the plan for the talk is to talk about 3 or 4 things. I want to talk about the nature of happiness, first of all. Secondly, I want to talk about the nature of erotic love. Thirdly, about the nature of friendship, especially as understood by Aristotle. And finally, I want to say a little bit about heaven. And I think all 4 of these things are very important in terms of understanding the Church's teaching on contraception and the value of procreation. Right? So happiness, erotic love, friendship, and heaven. So one line from Humanae Vitae, a very important line, is this, that children contribute very significantly to the welfare of their parents. Right? Children contribute very significantly to the welfare of their parents. And this is kind of a surprising thing for any of you who are parents. If you know that you, as a parent, give very much to your children, right? And you might think, well, what do children give back? And you might think of things like a tie or, a Mother's Day card, and that's fine, that's nice. I like to get, little things for my kids. That's a lot of fun. But what do they give that's more significant? Well, I think they actually give a lot. I think the Church has a lot of wisdom in calling children the supreme gift of marriage. Again, that language, children are the supreme gift of marriage, was found in Humanae Vitae and found earlier in the Second Vatican Council, in Gaudium et Spes, and found even earlier in the writings of Augustine. St. Augustine of Hippo called children one of the goods of marriage. So let's start off and first talk about happiness. What is happiness? How do we become happy? Well, as you know, in our culture, many different views about happiness are out there. And one of the views you could call the happiness of the hedonist. And that's a person who thinks, look, I'm going to find happiness, and I'm going to find it through drugs, through sex, through drinking, maybe lying on the beach and getting a suntan. That's how I'm going to find happiness, right? And lots of people think this is a good way to happiness. There's actually, though, a lot of empirical research that shows that this path to happiness isn't a path that leads very far. Basically, what happens with the happiness of the hedonist is even though the happiness comes on quickly, right? If you drink alcohol, within 5 or 10 minutes you feel something. So it comes on very quickly, but then scholars note that it leaves very quickly also, right? Moreover, because we're human, we need a lot more than simple bodily pleasure in order to find real happiness. right? Think about it. Would you trade your life for the life of a well-fed pig? You would? Okay. Well, other than you, everybody else wouldn't want to be just a well-fed pig, right? We want more than just bodily pleasure. And as we know also, bodily pleasure has a big problem that many people become very addicted, right? So they become alcoholics or they become drug addicts. They have all these very serious problems. And to be an addict seems to be the very opposite of being a happy person, right? Ask anybody who's in AA, right? Was that a happy life? Well, of course not. That's why they got into AA, because they realized this is a very unhappy life. So this kind of happiness really doesn't succeed in delivering what we hope for. And yet, our society sometimes glamorizes it and makes it appear as if this is really all we need. Now, everyone in our society virtually moves out of this happiness of the hedonist. Right here I'm drawing on Father Robert Spitzer's idea of the levels of happiness, right? So I talked about level 1 happiness. So what is level 2 happiness? Well, you could call this the happiness of the egoist. And the happiness of the egoist is something like this. I'm going to be happy if I'm better than you in some way, right? If I'm richer, if I'm better dressed, if I have a Rolex and you don't, if I have a Porsche, I don't, but if I had a Porsche, I'd say, oh, I've got this great car. The idea is basically you compete with others and you've become happy, you think, through being better than others, right? Richer, more famous, more powerful, better car, better clothes, more friends on Facebook, or whatever, right? Now again, our society pushes this idea of happiness, right? Think of advertising. Very typically pushes this idea of happiness as being the top of the pyramid and being better than others. But once again, if we look at the evidence, it shows pretty clearly that this kind of happiness, the happiness of the egoist, is really not going to deliver on what we're looking for, right? Now, how do we know that? Well, for instance, they did a survey of the Fortune 500 CEOs, and they surveyed how happy they were. And it turned out that most of them were no happier than regular people, right? In other words, the most wealthy people of all, they didn't find any more happiness. Do we need money to be happy? Of course we do. Of course we do. If you're extremely poor, if you don't have 3 meals a day, right? If you don't have a place to sleep, if you're wandering around in a cold climate with no coat, well, more money to get you 3 meals a day and a place to sleep and a coat are going to make you a lot more happy. But basically what the researchers found is once you break out of grinding poverty, right? Once you have 3 meals a day and a place to sleep and clothes, that more happiness, or more money rather, makes no difference for happiness. Right? So in other words, if I tell you, here's 3 people. One person makes $40,000 a year. The second person makes $400,000 a year. And the third person makes $4 million a year. I've told you absolutely nothing about who would be more or less happy. It doesn't make any difference at all. Again, once you're out of grinding poverty. Same thing's true of fame. Same thing's true of power. Think of, for instance, the famous and powerful musician Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, as you may know, had the best-selling album of all time. It's called Thriller, right? You may have heard of it. And if you look at the second and third best-selling records of all time, that would be AC/DC's Back in Black and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Now, if you add up second and third, add those together, that's still not as much as Michael Jackson. In other words, Michael Jackson's not just number 1, he's number 1 by a mile, right? And Michael Jackson, before he died, said this: after Thriller, I spent the rest of my career trying to outdo Thriller, right? So in other words, even the person who in fact was number 1 still wasn't satisfied, right? Still wanted more, right? Think about being number 1 in terms of power, right? I don't know, maybe if you got elected president of the United States, right? I'm sure the first day you move into the Oval Office and, you're in the White House and you wake up the first day in the White House and you're like, I'm president, woohoo! And you're amazed and you're happy and this is great. But really, do you think Donald Trump this morning woke up and did a jig? I'm president, this is great, amazing, I can't believe it. Well, no, he's used to it, right? Right? And you get used to anything, even being president, even being pope. It doesn't matter how high you get, right? The first week or two, of course, first month, okay, it's amazing. But, pretty soon, it's just like, yep, one more day as pope, one more day as president, same old thing, you're used to it, right? This is called, in psychological terms, hedonic adaptation. The idea is basically however high you get in terms of money or power or fame or prestige or whatever, you get used to it. And before long, it's just the way things are. Here's one way to think about it. Think about your own financial situation. If you look back maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I'm guessing, if you're like me at least, you make a lot more money than you did way back then, right? I remember being in graduate school at the University of Notre Dame, and I had 3 kids already, and my wife wasn't working, and I was making $10,000 a year, right? So to a family of 5 on $10,000 a year, that's not very wealthy. And I remember my first job, I got my first job at Loyola, New Orleans, and I made $36,000 a year. And I thought, this is, almost 4 times what I was making. And I thought, oh my God, I felt just loaded. I felt like Richie Rich for the first, 2 months. But, pretty soon, a few months later, I was used to it, right? And that's just the way human beings are, right? We just get used to it. Now, sometimes people might think, look, okay, fine, level 1 happiness doesn't work. The happiness of the hedonist doesn't work. Fine, okay. Level 2 happiness doesn't work. The happiness of the egoist, more money, more fame, more power than other people. Okay, that doesn't really work. But let's put them together, right? That'll work. And we have people who have done this very effectively. They're called in our culture celebrities, right? Isn't it true? If you're a movie star, if you're a rock star, you are going to have lots of level 1 happiness, or at least you could, right? I don't think, rock stars have trouble finding alcohol, right, and drinking, or doing drugs, or finding sex partners. They have lots of that, right? And then they have lots of the happiness of the hedonist, lots of level 2, right? They're famous, right? That's what, if you're a celebrity, of course, that goes with the territory. You're wealthy, you're powerful, you're influential, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let me ask you, is it true that all celebrities always find deep happiness? Right? Have you ever heard of celebrities that were so deliriously happy, so, all the booze and the drugs and the sex and the fame and the money made them so happy that they ended up killing themselves? Right? Happens all the time. It doesn't matter how much you get. You could literally be the most famous person in the world, the most wealthy person in the world, the person who's taking the most drugs, sex, alcohol in the world, and be completely miserable. Right? So celebrities, it seems to me, are the most obvious evidence possible that level 1 happiness, happiness of the hedonist, and level 2 happiness don't actually deliver on happiness. We're not really going to get there. Okay, so what's the alternative? Well, the alternative would be to move higher, to move into not being a hedonist, not being an egoist, but being an altruist. So an altruist, a level 3 sort of person, would be somebody whose goal in life is to love other people, right? That's their goal. Their goal in life is to love other people, right? Maybe their husband, their wife, their kids, their neighbors, their mom, their dad, their friends, the people in the parish. That's what they want. They want to love other people, right? And the research in psychology shows very clearly that this is the most important factor for happiness, is having loving relationships. Not necessarily sexual relationships, but loving relationships, friends, family, etc. There's a famous study done at Harvard University called the Grant Study. The researchers spent millions and millions of dollars studying people over the course of their whole lives. They started off studying these people when they were undergraduates at Harvard, so they were 18, 19 years old, and they studied them all the way through their entire lives. The study only ended when the last people died in their 90s. Right? So 70 years they studied some of these people. And what they found was this, that the number one thing that made a difference in life was love. The person who the lead researcher said, was asked to summarize the study, and he said that happiness is love, full stop. Those people who had loving relationships, good friendships with people, loving family relationships, etc., they had great lives. And those who lacked that, no matter how wealthy they were, no matter how high in the company, had lives that ended up being very unfortunate, right? So level 3 happiness, it's about doing good for others. It's about even sacrificing for the sake of others. But there's even a higher level of happiness. We could call that level 4 happiness, the happiness that the altruist of faith seeks after. And the altruist of faith is like an altruist. They find happiness through loving other people, but they add something else. They add love of God. They add love of God. And anyone who is at level 4 also has level 3. Why? Well, because if you really love God, well, then, of course, you love the image of God that you find in other people, right? How can I say I love God so much if I don't love the image of God that I find in my neighbor? That's not consistent. If I really love God, I'll love other people who are a manifestation of God in some way. And level 4 happiness makes a big difference. From psychological research alone, it shows that people who practice their faith are more resilient, live longer lives on average, have less mental health problems on average, and have happier lives. A recent article in the LA Times showed that even though suicide is unfortunately in our society going up, there was one group of people that had, in this large study, no suicides, 0%. And that was Catholic women who practice their faith. Lowest rate of suicide of any group, right? So practicing faith, level 4, is a really central part of human flourishing. Now again, as Catholics, this is no surprise to us. Think of what the good Lord said when he was asked, what's the most important commandment? Right? He said what? Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and secondly, love your neighbor as yourself. He said, right, level 4 and level 3. He also said what? He said that we should forgive our neighbor. How many times? 70 times 7. And that's not 140, and the 141st time you can say, forget it, I'm not, No, the idea is a perfect number of times. It's a symbolic way of talking about perfection, right? And again, if we turn to secular psychology, they said that forgiveness is probably the most important thing to do in order to be happy. Let me say that again. Forgiveness is probably the most important thing to do to be happy. Why is that? Well, if, as I just said, loving relationships are absolutely the foundation of happiness, well, you can't have loving relationships with people unless you are willing to forgive them. Because as we all know, if you have a relationship with someone, a friend, a spouse, a child, whatever, of course, sooner or later, they're going to do something or say something that offends you, that hurts your feelings. And so if you don't have forgiveness, you just say, that's it, we're not talking anymore, that's over. I'm deleting you from Facebook, I'm not sending you a Christmas card, we're over, it's done, right? And you offend me first, so okay, you're out, you offend me next, you're out, you next. And if I keep doing this, right, no forgiveness, I'm just going to end up with no friends, no family that I talk to anymore. I'm going to be totally alone. And that is a recipe for great, great unhappiness. So we have these 4 levels of happiness, and we have to choose in life. Sometimes we can have all 4, right? Maybe this morning you ate at breakfast, you had some level 1 happiness. Well, that's great, right? That allowed you to get some level 2 happiness. You come here, you learn something hopefully, and so you know more than other people, you have some level 2. And maybe you want to know more so you can help other people. That's level 3. And maybe you want to help other people because you love God. And you know, if you want to serve God, you serve him in part by loving other people. So you can have all 4 of these levels of happiness all working together. But sometimes, of course, we have to choose level 1 or level 2. Right? Sleep in, get some level 1, but then you miss work. You miss out on money, level 2. Right? And sometimes level 2 and level 3 come into conflict. I'm going to win the race, but I'm using steroids to win the race. So I'm being unfair to other people. So level 2 and level 3 come into conflict. Okay. How does all this relate to procreation? Well, let's think about it. Let's put on our level 1 hats. I know no one here is a level 1 person. You know how I know this? Because if you were a level 1 person, you wouldn't be here, right? I mean, clearly, there's ways of getting bodily pleasure. I know I'm a great speaker, but even more than my speaking, there's ways of getting bodily pleasure that you could be getting right now, right? Shooting heroin, doing whatever, but you're here, right? So you're not a level 1 person, but imagine you were. Now think about procreation from a level 1 perspective, right? Are you going to want to have procreation? If you're a man, would you want to impregnate someone? If you're a woman, would you want to be impregnated? Well, if you're at a level 1 perspective, of course not. This is not going to give you more bodily pleasure, right? Especially if you're a woman, it's almost certainly going to decrease your bodily pleasure, right? You might be like my wife. My poor wife had morning sickness, right? All 7 times. For some of the kids, all the way through. 9 months of morning sickness. I mean, that's awful, right? So that's not going to be. And then I haven't given birth, of course, but being there when my wife has, that doesn't look like a level 1 plus. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It just seems, outsider perspective, not a lot of level 1, right? So clearly, if you are at a pure level 1 perspective, you're going to say, look, contraception's great. In fact, you probably want to get sterilized when you're 14 and make sure you don't have kids because procreation is going to get in the way for level 1. And then what about level 2, the happiness of the egoist? Are kids going to help make you money? Well, maybe, right? Maybe your child is going to be the next Justin Bieber, right? The next big star in music or whatever. But, right, 99.9999% of kids, right, don't make their parents money, right? Almost always parents spend money, right? Is your child going to make you powerful? Probably not, right? Famous? Probably not. Is it going to help you move up the corporate ladder? Probably not, right? So again, if you think about it from a level 2 perspective, you'd say, look, maybe you should have 1 kid, but probably none actually. And, you can see how contraception would be a huge plus from a level 2 perspective. Now, what about a level 3 perspective, right? You think about the purpose of life as loving and serving and helping other people. Well, having children from that perspective is going to be an enormous plus, right? Everyone here who's a parent, every mother here, every father here knows that when you have a baby, you serve that child in countless ways, right? Non-stop. You're on duty, as it were, for hours and hours and hours, right? Changing diapers, giving little baths, putting on little, socks. You're doing all kinds of things nonstop. And of course, it doesn't stop when the child's a baby, right? You got to help the 2-year-old, help them learn how to walk and whatever. And then they got a 5-year-old, you get out there with a bicycle, teach them how to ride the bike, right? You got a 6-year-old, you throw the baseball in the backyard, right? They're in grade school, you got to help them with the multiplication tables, right? They're in high school, they have a boyfriend and they get dumped and they're crying and they're sad. You got to comfort them, all the way through life, right? Until the circle of life starts again and your child has a child and you become a grandmother or grandfather. And again, you're in there in the trenches helping out, right? So from a level 3 perspective, this is an enormous plus, right? You have built-in opportunities galore for level 3. And you might say, which is true, you don't need to have kids to have level 3 happiness. Of course you don't. Of course, you could be a priest, a nun, a single person, and do enormous service to the human community. That's definitely true. But having children is a way of locking it in, you might say, of guaranteeing that you're going to be doing this. So it's a little bit like this. At New Year's Eve, sometimes people make New Year's resolutions, and they say, well, I'm going to be more healthy next year, right? And if that's all you say, I want to be more healthy, maybe you will. Maybe you'll exercise and eat well, but chances are if you say, I'm going to be healthy, it's just going to turn into nothing happening. But if you're very concrete and specific, if you say, I'm going to get healthy, and that means every single day I'm going to walk for at least 50 minutes, and every single day I'm going to eat kale for breakfast, right? So if you said that, well, it's very concrete and specific. It's more likely, actually, that it's going to happen, right? So getting married and having children is a way of making concrete and specific love of God and love of neighbor, right? Because it's much more likely you're actually going to carry it out because you've got this very concrete person that you are going to try to help, right? Now, what about from a level 4 perspective? How does procreation look from that perspective? Well, from a level 4 perspective, it's not just the mother and the father who make the baby, right? The mother gives some material, the egg. The father gives some material, the sperm. But it's God who gives the soul. The immortal soul is immaterial, so it's not just the material egg and the material sperm that come together. There's something else that comes. So it takes 3 to make a child, right? Mother, father, and God. And so people who procreate are cooperating with God in a very direct sort of way. I remember after I had my first child, I wrote a professor of mine at Boston College, Peter Kraft, a great professor if you don't know who he is. And I just wanted to let him know, I had my first child, and he wrote back a great letter to me, and I still have it. And in the letter he said, having a child is the most important natural thing a person can do. Now, in the supernatural order, being a priest, turning bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, well, that transcends it. But on the natural order, it is the most important thing someone can do. And then every single human person has an immortal soul. And imagine the significance of that. Most beautiful things end up being destructed. I just read an interesting biography of the great artist Michelangelo. And I read in this book, and it just made me sick to my stomach, that a good chunk of Michelangelo's sculptures have been entirely lost. People literally don't know where they are. And if they're like everything else he did, I'm sure they're completely beautiful and, literally priceless. And we don't know where they are. Are they destroyed? Are they just buried somewhere? Who knows, right? And even his most famous sculptures will someday be lost, right? Think about the Pietà. You might say, well, how could that get lost, right? It's in St. Peter's. Well, St. Peter's is going to be lost someday, right? I mean, when the sun supernovas, the sun, scientists tell us, is going to expand, and it's going to be eventually 400 times as big as it is now. Now, people are getting alarmed. Don't worry. This is supposed to happen like billions of years from now. No one's going to be around. Don't worry. But, billions of years from now, the sun's going to get enormous. And when that happens, the earth is going to be totally destroyed, right? And St. Peter's Basilica will be totally destroyed. Michelangelo's great Pietà will be totally destroyed. But to have a child is to cooperate with God to create an immortal soul who will not be destroyed. In 1,000,000 years, in 1,000,000,000 years, for all eternity. You're creating something of beauty that is going to last forever. So, if we think about procreation from a level 4 perspective, we have everything that a level 3 perspective has, plus we have the idea of cooperating with God to make an immortal soul that's going to last forever. How amazing and how wonderful that is. How good procreation is. So, in terms of happiness, you can see different points of view. We're going to have different views about procreation, right? But let's turn to a different point of view altogether. Let's talk a little bit about erotic love, right? What is erotic love? Well, love comes in various dimensions, right? There's friendship kind of love, right? Between friends. There's parental love of a parent for a child. And erotic love is what? Well, erotic love is what we would call romantic love, right? It's a love of people that are engaged to get married, right? It's a love between husband and wife, hopefully. And it's been talked about in different ways, but the most famous way of talking about erotic love ever probably was from Plato. Plato had a famous work called the Symposium. And in the Symposium, there's a story told about how erotic love came into existence. And the story goes like this. In the beginning, human beings were very different than they are now. Human beings were like two people glued back to back. They had 4 arms, and they had 4 legs, and 2 faces. They were like these circle people, and they were very powerful. And these circle people rebelled against the gods. They tried to storm heaven. And as a result, the gods pushed back, and the gods decided to punish these rebellious human beings. And so the gods said, okay, how about we destroy all these human beings? And other gods said, no, we need their worship and stuff, so we can't destroy them. And then another god said, well, how about this? How about we cut these human beings in half to weaken them, right? And so Zeus thought that was a pretty good idea. So he said, all right. He's going to send his lightning bolts, and he cut all these human beings in half, right? So then we gain the form that we have now, right? Not 4 arms, just 2, right? Not 2 faces, just 1, etc. But what happened as a result of this punishment is that the halves yearned to be reunited, right? If I was cut off from my former half, I'd want to be reunited with her, right? And that is, according to Plato, the origin of erotic love. And even in our culture today, we still kind of have an inkling of this idea, right? Some married couples, if you say, well, where's your wife? And say, oh, my better half is at home now, right? And we talk about sometimes when a romantic relationship ends, we just call it what? Breaking up, right? We were one, and now we're two, right? So the idea of erotic love is what? That you want to be as united as you can be with the one that you love. And think about how people that are deeply in love, what do they want? Well, they want to get married. Why? Well, because to be married to someone is to be as united as you can be with them. Right? You take those vows. I promise to be faithful to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. In other words, I want to be together with you as your spouse as long as you both shall live. And so erotic love is this drive for unity. It's this drive to be as united as you can be. Right? And think about this. Why would children be the supreme gift of marriage? Well, in having children, in procreating, the couple does become as united as they can be, right? A couple obviously becomes united when they make love, but that lasts only a short time. When a couple has a child together, the child is a physical manifestation of the unity that existed between the mother and the father. Each one of us is a walking monument to the unity that existed at one time between our mother and our father. Part of him and part of her come together and create us, a mingling of the two. And normally, it's not just a physical mingling, it's always that, but almost always it's more than that. The mother and the father are also united in loving that child. So my wife's parents got divorced, and they didn't like one another anymore, and they, fighting, and et cetera, et cetera. But even though they didn't live together anymore and they were divorced, they always still shared a deep love for my wife. No matter what they went through, they still shared a love for their own daughter. And that's very typical, right? Couples, whether they're married or divorced, almost all of them love their own kids. And so they're united in that. The couple's united also in terms of their emotional life, right? If things go well for the kid, they're united together in that. If things go badly for the kid, they're united in being sad about that. So children unify the couple in a very radical sort of way. Children, in other words, are a manifestation, a realization of the goal of erotic love, to be as united as you can be, right? Again, procreation as a good. Now, how does contraception fit into all this? Well, contraception is a way of disuniting with your spouse, right? The idea is that you do not want part of you to be united with part of your spouse. You want to protect yourself from that, right? It's the opposite of erotic love. If erotic love is seeking to be as united as you possibly can be, contraception is seeking not to be united as you possibly can be, to withhold something quite important. That is, your distinctive potential as a potential father or as a potential mother. And think about what that says. It says a lot if you're willing to make love with someone, be open to the possibility of being a father or becoming a mother with that person. Right? That says something that says that you're so committed and you're so united to them, that you're willing to be united and you're open to being united with them for the rest of your life. Because if you have a child with someone, you are, in fact, united to them for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, that person's the other parent of this kid. Right? So contraception is a deeply anti-erotic act. Now, let's say a word about friendship. Probably the most famous account ever given of friendship was given by Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics. If you haven't read this book, honestly, this is one of the best books literally ever written, all-time classic, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And in the book, he talks about friendship, and he says, okay, well, what is a friend, right? And Aristotle said, well, friends involve a number of things. One of them is they involve mutual goodwill, right? So if I'm friends with you, you're also friends with me back. It's impossible to have a one-way friendship. Right? In other words, if I'm friends with you and you don't reciprocate, you're not friends back to me, well, we're not really friends then, right? I mean, if I send Tom Cruise, a gift basket on his birthday and, cards and whatever, and he never responds, well, I'm not really friends with him. I'm a fan or whatever, but I'm not a friend of his, right? So friendship involves mutual goodwill, according to Aristotle. Friendship, secondly, also involves shared activity, right? Friends do things together. And different kinds of friends do different kinds of things. So I have some friends that I like to do martial arts with, right? Other friends I like to sing with. Other friends I like to hang out with. So, you do different things, but the idea is if you're really friends, you do some kind of shared activity with the person, right? And friends also, Aristotle said, have a shared emotional life, right? That if you're friends with someone, you are united with them if they're doing well. If we're friends and you get a great new job that you love, I'm really happy for you. If you get fired from a job you love, I'm really sad for you. But we're united, right? What's good for you is good for me in a sense, right? So, moreover, Aristotle talked about different kinds of friendship. He said there are friends of pleasure, friends of utility, and friends of virtue. And the difference is fairly simple. A friend of pleasure is a little bit like a level 1 friendship, right? It's just a beer buddy, and we're drinking, and that's all it's about, it's just having fun, and that's the end of it. And then there's level 2 kind of friendship, a friendship of utility, and that's where I'm friends with you because of what you're giving to me, right? So maybe you have a car and I don't, so we're friends, you drive me around. Or you're friends with me because I have a computer and you don't, I'll let you use my computer, right? But a friendship of virtue, Aristotle said, was the best kind of friendship, because that kind of friendship wasn't based on something that's transitory, right? What's useful is transitory, right? When you were in high school, it's probably really useful to have a friend who was good at chemistry, right? He could help you study and whatever, but I'm guessing you passed chemistry, that's over. And if all your friendship was based on was help with chemistry homework, well, that's the end of your friendship, right? A friendship of virtue, by contrast, is about something deeper. It's about friendship with a person because the person is a really good person. Okay, so that's Aristotle and friendship. Now, back to procreation. How does procreation fit in here? Well, procreation is a way of enhancing a friendship of virtue with your spouse, right? Why? Well, first of all, let's go back. Think about it. Friendship involves mutual goodwill. If I have a child with my wife, I have an extra reason to have goodwill for her, right? She's not just my wife, she's also the mother of our kids, right? I have an extra reason to be a good husband. I know that if our marriage goes sideways and we break up, it's not just a matter that affects me and her, it's something that affects all of our kids. And so if we have a fight and I'm upset and whatever, I can think, okay, yeah, I'm upset with her, but I've got these kids, I really better patch things together. And there's actually empirical research that shows that the number of children a couple has is linked to their likelihood of divorce. There's a famous study done by, in a book called The Evolution of Desire. And it was a study done around the world, 46 different nations. And what it found was this, that if a couple had no children at all, their likelihood of divorce was about 39%. If they have one child, the likelihood of divorce dropped to 24%. If they had 2 children, the likelihood of divorce dropped to about 16%. And if they had 4 or more children, they had less than a 3% likelihood of divorce, right? So it basically went down, 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 down. And you can see why, right? If you've got a bunch of kids with someone, you have a huge motivation to make it work, right? You're really going to try your best. And hopefully the other person's going to try their best too to make sure that the marriage works, because this affects this whole family, right? And if you think about a marital friendship of pleasure, well, contraception would probably be pretty good for that. Because if all marriage was about was just enjoying your spouse sexually, well, having kids doesn't really help with that. And again, a marital friendship of utility, you can see how contraception and not having kids would probably be a pretty good idea, right? Because again, it's not going to help you make more money, things like that. But think about it in terms of a marital friendship of virtue, right? How do we get virtues? Well, Aristotle said we get virtues by repeatedly doing virtuous activity. It's like becoming a piano player. How do I become a piano player? Well, by sitting down and repeatedly playing the piano. How do I become a swimmer? Well, not by hearing lectures on swimming, but by getting in the pool and going back and forth, right? How do we become virtuous? Well, we become virtuous, Aristotle thought, by repeatedly doing virtuous acts. And when a couple procreates, what do? Well, they bring home the baby, and somebody has got to change the diaper, and somebody has to feed the baby, and someone has to wash the baby, and you have to do all these activities. And not just once, not just for a week, but over and over and over and over again. You're doing good, virtuous, patient loving acts. And the more we do good, patient, virtuous, loving acts, the more we become good, patient, virtuous, loving people. Right? We become better. And if Aristotle is right, our relationship becomes better. Right? Because each person is developing and growing, becoming more virtuous. Okay, so we talked about happiness, we talked about erotic love, we talked about friendship. Finally, let me say a word about getting to heaven. So Jesus was asked very famously in the Gospel of Matthew, what do I have to do to be saved? And the first thing Jesus said back to the young man was, obey the commandments, right? And so if we think about the 10 Commandments, those are, you might say, kind of rules that enable us to continue in love of God and love of neighbor. The very first of the 10 Commandments is that we should have no God before God. We shouldn't worship any idol. And the idol that people worship most often is, you might say, the idol of the self. Right? Think about the sin of Adam and Eve. What was it about? Well, it was about becoming like God. They wanted to replace God. Right? And the atheistic philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said that the desire to be God is what characterizes human life. That all of us, even though he's an atheist, he thought all of us to a greater or lesser degree want to be God. Now, how does procreation of children fit into this equation? Well, when you have children, it becomes very clear that you're not God. When you're younger, when you're a little child, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, you know you're not God, right? Because mom and dad tell you when to get up. They tell you what you're going to eat for breakfast, or you're going to go to here, you're going to do this, and everything in your day is under their jurisdiction. But when you get older, right, think in your 20s, if you don't have kids, you don't have vows, you're just free and easy, you might kind of think, sort of, it's almost like you're God, right? You do whatever you want. I get up when I want, I eat what I want, I put on the clothes that I want. My whole day is what I want. I'm in charge, I'm in control, right? I define the universe, right? But when you have kids, that idea that you're God is shattered. You realize, no. I mean, first of all, you don't even control whether or not you have a boy or a girl, right? You might really want one and you get the other. And you might say, okay, well, we can adopt a child. All right, fine. You adopt the child you want. You want a boy? Fine, you adopt a boy. Great. But even then, you don't really control the child. You can't make the child do what you want. You can try your best. My wife and I, we tried our best, and nevertheless, we still had a couple hiccups along the way. One time we were at LMU, and I had a Jesuit friend. The Jesuits founded LMU, and I had a Jesuit priest friend who said, hey, why don't you bring your family over for lunch? And I said, well, some of the kids are in school, but I'll bring the two young kids, the two boys at the time, were two youngest. So I think they were 2 and 4, William and George. And so I gave them a big lecture before. I said, okay, guys, this is big time. We're going to the rectory, and I want you to have good manners. I want you to say please and thank you. Use a napkin and, no funny business. Okay, Dad, yeah, okay, great. And so, they did a great job. They went all the way through their meal, and everything was great, and I was so proud of them. And at the end of the meal, my son George says, Dad, I have to go to the bathroom. I said, oh, okay, yeah, great. Because he was potty training at the time. I was like, yeah, we better get this, make sure this happens. So I get up from the table there. I'm at the table, and let's see if I can get this. Yeah. So I get up from the table, and I grab his little hand, right? And he's walking over here. And we walk across through all the tables. All the Jesuits are walking around and are sitting there eating dinner and lunch. And we go over here. We walk way over, and we get to the door of the bathroom. Get to the door of the bathroom. He goes, Dad, I don't have to go anymore. Okay. So I walk back, and his little hand. And as I'm walking back, I look on the ground, and oh my gosh, there's a bunch of little brown marbles all the way through. Oh, no. It was not good. Now, I did grow a little bit in humility at that point, but... So anyway, yeah, he had deposited his remains all the way through the... Not good. Anyway, all parents are going to have similar stories of their kids humbling them their kids are reminding them in very vivid ways that they're not in charge, that they're not God, that they are not in control of things. And it is humiliating to do that, but it's also good, right? It's good to have these reminders that we're not ultimately in charge, right? That there's only one God and that we're not that person. It's good to be reminded of that. The fourth commandment is what? To honor your father and mother, right? And again, I think I'll just talk about myself. When I was a young man, before I had kids, I kind of looked down on my parents. And I thought, oh, you didn't do that right. I remember that. That was a real mistake. And, oh, Mom, I missed the boat on that. And, oh, I was very critical. And I really thought they were just, not doing that hot. B+ probably, not that good. And then I had my own kids. And I thought, I'm going to be the best dad ever. A++, I'm going to be just the best dad. And I really did want to be the best dad. But I couldn't even get my first child into the house without making a huge mistake. I mean, literally, I'll tell you what happened. So my oldest child is Elizabeth. We're driving her home from the hospital, right? And so, I have the baby seat and the carrier and all the baby stuff, and my wife goes inside. And I'm unloading the car and get all, the diaper bag and all the stuff, all the gear. I had my first child. I didn't know all this stuff. And, I undo the car seat, and I put Elizabeth on top of this big pile of stuff, and I go in and grab the next stuff. And Elizabeth rolled off the thing. Oh, Lord. Horrible. Fault. She was okay, but, she's screaming and crying. And, oh, my gosh. I thought, this is a disaster. The first day, I can't even get the kid in the house without a big problem, And again, I could spend the hours telling you all the mistakes I've made as a father, even though I love my kids so much, like incredibly. I love them so much. But I'm imperfect. I'm weak. I make mistakes. This is human life, right? And only after I had kids could I really appreciate what my own parents did for me. Being up, 1 a.m, walking around with a sick baby. Changing diapers. When I was a little boy, my dad was in the military, and he was in his, full dress uniform and all this, and he was getting on a plane to fly to Vietnam. And I was a baby. I threw up all over his dress uniform right before he got in the plane. Now, my kids got me back. We were flying back from Europe, flying back from Germany one time. So we're in a big, long flight, and I had not one, but 2 kids throw up on me on that flight. So I outdid my dad. But anyway, having kids is a way of fully getting a better understanding of what your own parents did for you. And when you have that, wow, does gratitude come more easily. It's so much easier for me now to honor my mother and my father, who are great people. I thought they were B+. That was ridiculous. They were A+. I just didn't see it at the time. I didn't realize it. But they really were. And only when I had kids did I really see it. And that's true for many people. And that's a great gift. Finally, our good Lord said that at the end of time, that he's going to separate the sheep and the goats, those going to heaven and those not going to heaven. And to those on one side, he's going to say, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And to those people, he says, come into my kingdom. And those on the other side, he's going to say, I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. And I was a stranger and you didn't welcome me. And those people go off to eternal punishment. And I remember hearing this story as a child and thinking, looking around the church, and I thought, we're all going to go to hell. This is horrible. I mean, who does this? Mother Teresa and her sisters, okay, well, they'll be there. But everybody else is we're in big trouble. But only after I became a father did I realize, a good father and a good mother literally does all those things. Right? The baby's hungry. You give the baby something to eat. The baby's thirsty. You give the baby something to drink. The baby's naked and you clothe that baby. And isn't it true that every child comes into the family as a stranger? You don't know what kind of child you're going to get. top of the class or learning disabilities, great athlete or the last to be picked at recess, someone who is going to sail through life having lots of friends, or someone who has a disposition towards depression and loneliness. But if you're a good parent, you love that child anyway, and you welcome that stranger into your home. So maybe when the good Lord encounters us at the Last Judgment, he'll look out at some of us, and he'll say to us, come into the kingdom, because we were good fathers, and we were good mothers. We did the things that he asked us to do for our own children, and did them with love. So, in conclusion, the church shows great wisdom in saying that children are the supreme gift of marriage and greatly help their parents to flourish. Thank you very much.